Hi, everybody. My name is Uma Mishra-Newberry. I am the Executive Director of Women's March Global, and today we are having another webinar for our My Human Right to Bodily Autonomy campaign. This campaign is something that we've been doing for the past couple of months in preparation for global mobilization on September 28th, which is the International Day of Safe Access to Abortion. Already, we have over 500 people who have signed our global solidarity statement from over 50 countries, and the list keeps on growing. Please, we will drop a link in the Facebook chat as you are viewing this so that you can sign on to the statement if you haven't already done so, and also share it with your social networks. So today, I'm really happy to have with us Marge. And Marge, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about the international campaign.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Marge Berer. I've been campaigning for the right to safe abortion since the late 1970s. I've published many articles on abortion as the editor of Reproductive Health Matters between 1993 and 2015. And since then, as an independent editor, I've published a special edition of Contraception on Medical Abortion, and I'm working on 2 new special editions, both on medical abortion and on decriminalization of abortion for 2 other journals. From 2002 until 2011, I chaired the steering committee of the International Campaign, the International Consortium for Medical Abortion, which was the group that really put medical abortion on the global map. It's hard to believe that in 2002 nobody had heard of medical abortion, but actually it was true. And since 2012, since it began, I've been involved in the international campaign for women's right to safe abortion. Now, the campaign is an experiment on a certain level. It's an international membership network, and currently has some 1,370 members in 125 countries in all world regions. Our long-term goals are full social and legal decriminalization of abortion, and safe abortion as a universally accessible, publicly funded healthcare service. Our members range from large international NGOs to regional networks, national groups, and many individuals, including health professionals, academics, policymakers, human rights experts, and people who are interested in these issues and working for these issues in all sorts of ways, not necessarily and often not only around abortion, but also around sexual and reproductive health and rights, development issues, issues of violence against women, issues of disability, and many other areas of work. The campaign has really 3 main areas that we work in. The first is to bring under one umbrella as many groups and individuals who are interested, who are committed to safe abortion. Secondly, to create a shared platform for advocacy, debate, and dialogue, and the sharing of skills and experience between members. And the third is to develop and disseminate evidence-based information and resources, including news of our members' activities and their work and what they produce, and also share what's happening in countries at the international level. So as you mentioned before, we're one of the coordinators of the International Safe Abortion Day on 28th of September every year, which was originated in Latin America in 1990. We publish a bi-weekly newsletter. We're active on social media. We support regional networking and national coalition building, and much, much more. And our principle that we try to always remember is that change in this area must happen first at national level. So that's the campaign in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Marge. And given that your work and the international coalition base spans across so many landscapes in so many countries, it would be incredibly beneficial for our community and our listeners to hear about what the global landscape for abortion rights looks
Mm,
like currently, if you could get into that.
right. The landscape, of course, is extremely complex because every country has a different abortion law, even though there are very few things that you can say in the law about abortion. And what's interesting is that almost every law uh, allows or disallows abortion on more or less the same 6 grounds. But they all have their own wording and they all have their own opinions about why it's that way. They very rarely listen to each other on the subject or pay attention to what each other are doing. And that makes it very complicated to try and campaign to reform the law. One of the things that historically is important is that many countries have anti-abortion laws that come from the colonial period, and that's British, French, Portuguese, and Spanish colonialism, where mainly in the 19th century, there were laws against abortion, which are still on the books in many of the former colonies, even though they've actually all been changed in the countries that originated them in Europe. So that's an important historical issue. And addressing that colonial history, I think, is often helpful for groups in realizing that this isn't just a traditional cultural point of view that originated in their own countries. Although there's so much conservative religious action against abortion that it then becomes a cultural and traditional issue in the countries where it's a problem. But in fact, the global landscape, and I try to be an optimist on this because I think when you're working on this issue, as long as I have, if you're not an optimist, you'll shoot yourself. So how I try to put it when I talk about this is that the situation globally is actually much more positive than most people think. There is, and there's no doubt about it, a big rise in anti-abortion activity in many countries. And much of that is actually funded by US anti-abortion groups. And it's very threatening. There's no question about it. They have a lot of money. They're paying public relations people to create campaigns for them. But I have to say that in many places, they are also really annoying people with really ugly campaigning stuff that people don't like and don't want to be exposed to it. So, for example, they put really horrendous pictures of fetuses torn into pieces in blood and outside children's schools. And where that's happened, the parents of the children in the schools have argued that they have to be taken down. So sometimes they're actually doing themselves a disservice by trying to influence opinion from that point of view. Obviously, right now, the most difficult example of anti-abortion activity is in the United States. So I thought I would just talk about that a bit because everybody hears about it. It's in the news all the time. And then let's try to get past it and look at the rest of the world. But in the US, the most important thing that's happening is that very bad abortion laws are being passed at state level. And because of the difference between federal rights and states' rights, they can get away with a great deal doing that in many other countries isn't possible to do. So it's making things difficult for large numbers of women. A lot of the things they're passing are to do with silly limitations on clinics who have to behave like hospitals in order to provide abortions when it's not medically necessary. They're also passing laws that they know are unconstitutional. Okay, so they're doing it for the harassment value. And on the other hand, there are some states, and there's not many yet, but the numbers are growing, almost reached 9 or 10, I think, by now, that are passing very liberal laws, allowing abortion, opening it up for women to be able to cross state borders easily and have abortions in those states. And I think that they're setting themselves up, if necessary, as states that will become abortion providers for the whole country. And in fact, that's how it was in the United States before the Supreme Court judgment in 1973. So maybe that's just how it's going to have to be again. But of course, the difference is that there are medical abortion pills now, and there weren't before 1973. So, and there's an enormous increase in the United States of women buying pills online and bypassing this problem that way. Not that anybody would recommend that, but needs must, as they say. You do what you have to do. The other thing that's important is that the pushback by the feminist, the medical, and the legal communities, the human rights groups in the United States, is challenging all of these restrictive laws, and that challenge has only just begun. Many of those laws should be struck down as long as the judges who hear the cases are neutral, they're not, biased, and that can be a problem because sometimes judges are elected. But the whole situation in the US is, to me, is a study in how to abuse the legal system by passing legislation, knowing it's unconstitutional, in order to tie everybody up in court cases to challenge it. And I think this is horrifically unethical among all the other things that it is. And my hope is that it's so unsupported by the population that that it can't go on for a long time, because surveys in the US are showing that since Trump stirred all of this up, the number of people in the US who support abortion rights is increasing quite rapidly, and particularly among women. And they are in the majority in the country. So I think this battle is far from over, although it's going to be quite a nasty one and take a long time. So I thought I might also give you some statistics about safe and unsafe abortion and try and give a historical perspective on those. There are about 56 million abortions globally per year. And of those, in the last few years, about 31 million were safe. And that's incredible, because 50 years ago, that number would have been so different. 17 million of them are somewhat unsafe. These are WHO categories. And only 8 million were very unsafe. And I say only 8 million because it's a major improvement compared to even 10 or 20 years ago. And particularly the shift from, in the unsafe category, from very unsafe to relatively unsafe. So, because the relatively unsafe means that women aren't dying and aren't necessarily getting the horrible morbidity and complications that they used to get, because unsafe abortions used to be mainly invasive, putting something in the uterus to try and stop the pregnancy, whereas now more and more women are using medical abortion pills. And they may have complications, mainly incomplete abortions, because either the pills aren't okay or they don't use them according to the protocols that exist. But those are not necessarily life-threatening and are much easier to treat if you turn up to an emergency room in a hospital. And in fact, health professionals are more willing to treat women who've used medical abortion pills because they're no longer having to deal with perforations of the uterus and hysterectomies and horrible infections from women putting parsley in their uterus and getting a terrible infection, this kind of thing. So deaths from unsafe abortion have fallen substantially. And this is both due to law reform and to the use of medical abortion pills. Asia has half of all unsafe abortions, and that's mainly because of the high population of the region. About 3 out of 4 abortions in Africa and Latin America are still considered unsafe, but not as unsafe as they used to be. The risk of dying from an unsafe abortion is highest in Africa, and that's the region where most improvement is needed. And there's a lot of work starting there, which is very exciting. I'll come to one or two examples of that later. But these numbers hide a lot of positive change.
Thank you so much, Marge, for that very extensive overview. I think it's really important for people to not only understand the historical context of why we are where we are in many parts of the world, but you brought up a point that struck me in terms of the fact that you said that maybe because of what's happening in the United States, we might have to go back to a place where people are driving, across state borders to access safe abortions. And there was this article that came out just a couple of days ago referencing the fact that in regional Australia, women have to drive over 500 kilometers to have access to safe abortion, and that landscape and that context of us actually going backwards in countries like the United States is so incredibly important. You brought up as well the influence that President Trump has had since he took office. And from a global perspective, we know, this his presence because of the global gag rule.
Yes.
And what the expansion, because the under his office, the gag rule has been expanded in a way that we haven't seen in this level of intensity. So I would love for you to talk about, in terms of the global gag rule, just a general overview. One, if people don't know what that is,
Yes.
but two, the impacts that we're seeing.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. There were two important publications came out this year on this subject and what's happening. One was published by the Lancet Global Health, and the other by the International Women's Health Coalition in New York. So basically what I'm going to say about it is what both of them have reported. First of all, the global gag rule started in 1975 under President Ronald Reagan at the first conference on population and development in Mexico City. So it's often called the Mexico City policy. And then it began to be called the global gag rule because the other population and development conferences have taken place in other cities. So, and what has happened is that it has been dropped and then reinstated with every presidency, depending on whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. And all Republican presidents have reinstated the global gag rule, and all the Democratic presidents deinstated it. I don't know what the word is for that, but got rid of it temporarily, but were unable to get rid of it permanently for reasons that can be found in U.S. public policy that I don't know about. The current iteration, you're right, is much worse because President Trump has extended the organizations and groups that are affected by it. And of course, this gag rule uses U.S. development funding to control what the groups they are funding are allowed to do. So it forces healthcare providers, particularly, to choose between providing a comprehensive set of reproductive healthcare services and receiving critical U.S. funding. So, and it prohibits any organization that provides abortion services or even abortion information or abortion counseling or abortion referrals or advocates expanding access to safe abortion care. So any organization that does those things, even if they're using the money of another funder, cannot receive US funding if they do those things. So they have to make a choice. And the problem is that many of those organizations are also providing contraception, providing treatment for HIV and sexually transmitted infections. And unless they drop the abortion aspect of it, they lose the funding. And the funding that's affected at the minute is estimated at $9 billion annually, which is a very large chunk of US foreign assistance. And the consequence, of course, has been, well, there are two big consequences. The most important is that the organizations involved who lose the money, who decide they're going to carry on providing abortion services or information even, it reduces their ability to provide contraceptives because normally they do both. And so the consequence is that there are increased abortion rates amongst the people that they're serving. And the rate has gone up some 40% in Africa, for example. The Lancet Global Health paper is about that fact, that the consequence of the global gag rule, whose intention is to stop people providing abortion care, is having the effect that abortion rates are going up because women can't get contraception. There was a decrease in the use of contraception, and there's been an increase in the number of pregnancies, both of which are about 3% and equal each other. So the policy is leading to more abortions, and most of those abortions are unsafe. It's a punitive policy, and it's intended to be punitive, and I think is motivated, well, by, I mean, I consider President Trump a misogynist of the first water, basically, and I think that's the motivation. He can't, because you can't justify a policy that's supposed to stop abortions when it increases abortions. There's another reason there. And it's about punishing women for being alive, as far as I'm concerned. So that's the global gag rule. And hopefully next year, the United States will recognize that they made a big mistake and they'll vote for a different president. And hopefully we'll lose the global gag rule again.
Well, talking about this current administration, and apologies for harping on about this one president, you know, the influence of the United States in, of course, national policy, but then also international policy, as we see by the global gag rule, cannot be ignored. And many people do not understand the reach that the United States has in the international context and how their voice can truly affect women and girls worldwide in terms of sexual health and reproductive rights. And for those of us in the NGO and CSO sector, we saw this at the last Security Council. And I would love for you to take people through what happened at the Security Council and why it should alarm everybody.
Yes, yes, that's a very important question. The fact is that there are, in some cases every year, and in some cases every 5 years, there are important international meetings which are attended by all governments and by hundreds of NGOs, including women's rights and human rights defenders. And at those meetings, international policy is developed. And what we've seen over the years is that the same issues come back again and again and again and again. And sexual and reproductive rights, in particular, are one of the most controversial areas. Sexuality education, gender equality, anything to do with gender issues at this point, anything to do with sexuality, are all sort of red light areas that cause a lot of controversy in these meetings. So what happens is that there's always opposition from some countries, from the more conservative countries, which can be quite serious. But over the last years, recent years, there's been an increasing support from the majority of countries for the issues that we stand for in particular. And not, abortion is probably the least consensual issue, but to do with sexual and reproductive rights more broadly and the intersectional issues around it, I think there's been an increasing level of support, both in the global north and the global south. So the meetings that are important, and the ones that have taken place this year, or one of which will take place next year, are the UN Security Council, the World Health Assembly. This year there's going to be a big meeting on universal health coverage, That's a relatively new issue. There are the Sustainable Development Goals meeting, and that's been for this whole century an issue. Then there's the International Conference on Population and Development, whose main topic is population and sexual and reproductive health and rights. And then next year, there's the World Conference on Women. And then there are also meetings like the Human Rights Council. And that meeting, Human Rights Council, just ended a couple of days ago, and the report on that has just come out. So what has happened is that there's always opposition, but Donald Trump made an announcement earlier this year that he intended to remove any language about sexual and reproductive health and rights, about safe abortion, about sexuality education, gender equality, gender identity, and basically human rights from every UN document being tabled the rest of this year and into next year. But the fact is that he's only succeeded so far once. And that was at the UN Security Council, where there was a resolution about sexual violence in which it said that women who experience sexual violence, women and girls who experience sexual violence, have a right to a safe abortion, among many other things that it said. Now, because in the Security Council, every member has veto, he vetoed it. And so the text in that resolution, he didn't veto the resolution, he vetoed the text in the resolution about sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that was taken out, and the part about safe abortion was taken out. But in all the other venues so far, okay, the World Health Assembly, there was a lot of opposition there, and I haven't managed to get hold of the text of the final resolutions, but my understanding is that a lot of progressive language was retained, and there was a very good resolution around our issues. In the Universal Health Coverage document, that has just been drafted, and that will be taken in September. That apparently is a very progressive document. The Sustainable Development Goals have already been agreed. So the meeting is really to talk about progress with those and how far countries have got in implementing them or not. And then, of course, the International Conference on Population and Development, that's only about sexual and reproductive health and rights and population and development. So that's an important space where there will be opposition. But for example, in the Human Rights Council, and I've seen that I've seen a summary of what happened there. There were a small group of 6 or 8 countries who consistently rejected every bit of text that mentioned sexuality education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and attempted to take rights language out of the resolution, and didn't manage to do so in any case. So that included, in fact, US wasn't on the list. It included Russia, Egypt, Bahrain, in one instance, Pakistan. And yet there were other resolutions where everybody supported them. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of opposition, but a lot of really strong support from many other governments. And so from our point of view as a campaign, we would like to talk to others working, other NGOs and women's organizations working on these issues about how to promote safe abortion in that context of opposition when it becomes the most conflict-creating issue, whereas others are willing to accept sexual and reproductive health at least. So I think that's really important for us for this year, and I think and we're consulting a lot of people right now, affect how we address international safe abortion this year, because our theme for this year is that abortion is healthcare, with the hashtag my health, my abortion, or the other way around. I can't remember which one it is, but yeah. So I think President Trump is not going to get his wishes, fortunately. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marge. And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is that in these spaces and seats of power at the Security Council, at the WHA, the World Health Assembly, and others, what we see more often than not is that in these negotiations, women's rights are the first thing to be put up for negotiation, and they are very much the first thing that are easily let go by many governments in their negotiations. So when you have a powerful government like the United States that is emboldening other far-right governments to, veto sexual health and reproductive rights, on these resolutions, it is an incredibly worrying trend, that we have to definitely take into account. We have talked a lot about, in this very expansive call, the global landscape of abortion rights, what's happening in the United States, what we see with the global Gag Rule, and what's happening in seats of power. Can you leave us on a note of positivity? Because I think it's important that we remember that while all of this is happening and there are tremendous fights to be had, there is still a lot of momentum within the women's rights space and the safe abortion space. So if you can talk about that, that would be fantastic.
Well, what I hope you're asking me to talk about is what some of the successes have been. Yes. Around abortion, really. But just to create a little context for that in response to what you've just said, my view is that we've got another 100 years in front of us before we're going to see less controversy stirred up around women's rights in general. And I think I don't think this is about abortion. I don't think this is about sexual health. Not really. I think this is about women's autonomy. For me, that's always been the bottom line. And when I first got involved with abortion rights, one of my mentors in the movement always said that abortion is the keystone to women's liberation. We don't use the women's liberation language anymore, but she always said that because until women aren't forced to get pregnant against their will, they'll never be free. And they'll never have gender equality because men don't have that problem. And pregnancy and children are, biologically speaking, so important to and have a total effect on women's lives. And unless women have a choice around that, have a choice about having children, having wanted children when they want them, and not having children when they can't cope with them, is a crucial issue. And I think if we always try to remember that and realize that we aren't just fighting about a clause on abortion in the development goals, we're fighting for women's freedom here. It makes a very big difference. And having said that, I think I think we're winning slowly, and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. But we have seen, for example, everybody knows about the success in Ireland with the referendum against the 8th Amendment, which meant that a fetus and a woman had equal rights, and therefore, in the end, the woman didn't have equal rights. The vote in Ireland to remove that amendment from the Constitution, and then a year later to change the law around abortion, which is not perfect, but which is catering for a large proportion of Irish women now in the first trimester of pregnancy anyway, and some in the second trimester. That change was so fast and so unexpected. Well, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was unexpected just because Ireland has changed so much as a member of the European Union. And because of the abuses, the sexual abuses of children with the Catholic Church, has become a much less church-dominated country. So that was major. And now, you know, tomorrow we're looking at a vote in the UK Parliament about changing the law in Northern Ireland. They have now been waiting 52 years since, you know, the rest of the UK got a decent abortion law. And they've waited 52 years just to have that law extended to Northern Ireland. So we're hoping for that vote tomorrow. That's been a really interesting, we just published a report about that in the newsletter this morning. We've seen in Poland, in a country with a very conservative government, with a large parliamentary majority, we've seen the women's movement prevent abortion law being made worse than it already is, and it's very bad. But we've seen the ability to prevent abortion being banned altogether, which is a major accomplishment. We've seen Chile, which had all abortions banned since 1989 as the last act of the dictator Pinochet before he left power. We've seen a change in the law allowing abortion on 3 grounds. Argentina has been, Argentina went to the hearts of everybody internationally, I think, where, you know, the movement has been tabling abortion bills one after the other and not getting anywhere with them. And then all of a sudden, everybody was in the street. And what they said last year was that abortion was decriminalized in the streets of Argentina, even if not in the Congress. And of course, a new bill has been tabled again this year. They didn't think they could go back that quickly again, but they've been able to do so. So that's coming up hopefully in the next weeks. I'm not sure about the exact program, but so that has been very exciting. And there were solidarity activities in 60 countries for Argentina when that was happening last year. It was unbelievably amazing. We've seen most recently in Kenya, where the global Gag Rule has had a major impact, and where the last iteration of the global Gag Rule forced the government to withdraw safe abortion guidelines in 2012 that had been passed following a change to the Constitution, which allowed some abortion. And then all that disappeared. And then there was a court case taken, which was finally heard this year. A decision was given this year, which was to do with the guidelines, was to do with the constitutional position on abortion, and it was also to do with the death of an adolescent girl. Her family was suing the government because she died from an unsafe abortion and couldn't get help. And the High Court of Kenya ruled in favor of the activists in the country. The safe abortion guidelines have been reinstituted. Compensation was given to the family of the girl. That's a major, major, major event because Africa has the Maputo protocols, which actually support abortion on a broad range of grounds. And that decision in that courtroom is going to have a major influence in the rest of Africa in terms of promoting the Maputo protocols to be implemented instead of ignored. So I think from my point of view, that's really one of the most important things that's happened in the last couple of months. But I think we're going to see more. And then I've already talked about the fact that medical abortion pills are changing the landscape. We're promoting self-use with support and backup where needed. We're promoting nurses and midwives and pharmacists being trained to provide medical abortion pills so that women can get them at primary and community level. We think it's time to take most abortions out of hospitals and to stop outdated methods like D&C being used, and to make it unnecessary for women to depend on scarce doctors in situations, you know, rural areas all over, in Canada, as you're talking about, in the US, as well as in the countries of Africa and Asia, having to depend on doctors who aren't there to give permission to have an abortion. So we're pushing for all of that. We're seeing national coalitions in support of safe abortion in many countries. There are regional networks in the US, in the Latin American region, in Africa, in the Middle East region. A network was just formed, Middle East and North Africa was just formed 3 months ago. There's a network in Central and Eastern Europe and Western Asia, and in Asia and in Southeast Asia. So the movement, the movement is growing so fast. It's incredible. We get a new member almost every day into the campaign at this point. And so, you know, that's why I'm optimistic, and why I think we all have to be optimistic and confident around this issue.
Absolutely. If there was one call to action that you could leave to everybody, what would that be?
Right now,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that given the themes of all the international meetings, universal health coverage, sustainable development, sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender equality, I would say to support the theme of International Safe Abortion Day, which is abortion is healthcare. And, you know, it's about public health, it's about rights. There is a human right to health, and women have a human right to health. So that's the slogan for this year, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much, Marge, and for your time, for your expertise, you know, and for your decades of commitment to fighting for women's bodily autonomy, for safe abortion. I would invite everybody to please check out the International Campaign for Women's Right to Safe Abortion. You can go in, you can enter your country and search for you know, news out of the country of what's happening in regards to abortion rights. And you know, stay tuned for updates from both the international campaign and also WMG about September 28th. And thank you so much, Marge, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'll be happy to work with you further on all these issues.
Thank you so much.
Very much, yeah.